What's up, guys? This is Ryan Fee for UpswingPoker.com, and what we're going to be doing today is answering a question that was posed in the Facebook group about pre-flop raise versus in sizing. So the question is, how come varying RFI sizing, depending upon position, isn't covered in the lab? Can anyone please explain the pros and cons? I have yet to grasp this concept. And he later goes on to say, I've seen some players play something like this: Lojack and Hijack, 3 to 3.5 big blinds, Cutoff, 2.5 big blinds, button and small blind, 2 big blinds. They do this because the later their position, the weaker their range. Hence, the more they will get 3-bet, etc. They don't want to invest as much pre with weak late position ranges as early ones. This seems like a really nice plan, so I'm just wondering what the cons are. So, I mean, this is funny. This is actually something that I used to play around with, because I was like, I wonder, right? I'm raising a tighter range. Should I maybe make that pre-flop bet size bigger? And we'll find it. The answer is, well, the short answer is no. Based on, from a purely theoretical standpoint, not very much a practical standpoint, the answer is no. If anything, you should raise bigger from the button. We'll cover that in a minute. But so we're looking at a big sample of hands here. It's played at micro stakes, like 5 and L10 now. And we're looking at Poker Tracker, and you sort of see all the positions over here. You see how many hands were played at each position. And then you see these two custom stats. The first custom stat is open face 3-bet, which essentially means once you raise first in, how often you'll face a 3-bet from that given position. And the other stat is stole, and that stat just says how often you raise first in, and then everyone folds and you win the blinds. So if you look at the open face 3-bet, and we'll just look at we're just going to focus up, we'll just focus on the in position positions here. You'll see that when we raise from early position, we get 3-bet about 21% of the time. From middle position, it's about 18, 20 from the cutoff, and then 18 from the button. So, basically from each position, we're being 3-bet about the same amount, or very, very similar, very comparable amount. Not an amount that would, cause me to necessarily want to adjust anything, especially when it came to bet sizing. Excuse me. Wouldn't necessarily want to adjust anything when it comes to bet sizing based on how much we're 3-bet, because we're basically 3-bet the same amount from each position. So let's talk about sort of the differences between the bet sizes. So if we were to raise to 3x from one of them, let's say we're going to compare, we'll compare 3.5x to 2.5x. So let's say we're going to raise to 3.5x from under the gun. What we would be doing is doing a favor for the middle position, cutoff, and button player, because they don't have anything invested into this pot, and once you raise, they're likely to play pretty tight, and they're likely to 3-bet a decent chunk of their range. By betting so big, you essentially allow them, especially because they're sort of worried about all the players left to act, you allow them to play just sort of the best hands in their range very profitably as either sort of a call or a 3-bet, because your raise is so big, it really is going to blow everybody else out of the pot. So it really sort of puts them into a sort of great spot because of your pre-flop bet size. Whereas the blind, specifically the big blind, it puts into a very bad spot. What will oftentimes happen under the big blind is that the big blind will call this raise. Now, given how big your raise size is, the big blind is going to have a much worse price on a call. His pile is going to be way worse. He's going to have to play way tighter. So it ends up ultimately working out poorly for the big blind and really well for everybody else. And sort of vice versa. If you were to raise to 2.5x, it would then be difficult to beat any of the in-position players because the smaller bet size is enticing a call, but they oftentimes don't want to call because that leaves them in a situation where players left to act can overcall or 3-bet a range which will, for the most part, not contain very many strong hands, and then put them in potentially a difficult spot. And the other thing is, by calling kind of sucks. You can never win the pot right there. And you, again, like we were saying, it allows sort of others to come into the pot. Essentially giving the rest of the players in the hand a good chance to realize equity. And if they're realizing their equity, chances are your hand's going to realize less equity. So by betting smaller, you end up making it harder for everybody else. Whereas the big blind is quite happy because they will be getting a better price on their call. If it's 3.5, they would have to call. In the 3.5 example, they would have to call 2.5 blinds to win a total pot of 7.5, whereas in the 2.5 example, they would have to call 1.5 to win a total pot of 5.5. So they would be getting much better pot odds. So it really depends on sort of who it works out the best for. The trend is online now, especially at high stakes, is to use a smaller bet size. And the reason is likely because you force the big blind to call with a lot of hands, which is good for them, but also ends up becoming tough for the big blind. And that's only one position. Because there's, the three or four other positions or however many people left in the hand, it ends up hurting each of them, and sort of helping the big blind. But because there's more of them, I think players tend to focus on, well, we're gonna sort of really put all these guys in a tough spot, and then sort of give a somewhat easier spot to one position. And I think as sort of an overall strategy, or at least that's their theory. That's what we want to do. That's sort of the strategy approach that we want to take. The one situation where this becomes a little bit different is the button. I've seen some players, and not a ton, but it's definitely been played around with the most, that actually raise to 2 to 2.5x from all of the earlier positions, but then raise to 2.5 to 3.5x from the button. The reason being is that they're definitely going to be in position in this situation, and they, in this situation, it's more so. I mean, let's take 3.5x again versus 2.5x. If you raise to 3.5x, it really puts the big blind in a tough spot, and the small blind it makes the small blind pretty happy. Small blind's going to 3-bet a lot of its range, and now that you're using this bigger bet size, it's making 3-betting even more enticing because no matter what you raise 2.5 to 3.5x, given sort of your range and the big blind left, there's not a ton of flexibility for them to play more or less hands. There's some, but not a ton. And by betting bigger, you allow them to 3-bet, win a bigger pot when you fold, and create a smaller pot to stack ratio post flop, which will sort of diminish your edge. That said, the small blind's going to be playing much tighter than the big blind in this situation. The big blind, you're really sort of putting the big blind in a very difficult situation by raising really big, because what the big blind will oftentimes do here is call many hands. The big blind is distinctively different from every other position at the table, given the full chip invested in its pot odds on any call, and the fact that it closes the action pre-flop, so that other players can't come in and sort of 3-bet or call behind to realize equity. So, I guess sort of to so sort of the converse of that would be, let's say you raise to 2.5x. If you raise to 2.5x on the button, now all of a sudden you're a bit more in equilibrium. The small blind is like a little bit less happy. It's not gonna. It's the pot stack ratio is gonna be deeper post flop. It's it's not gonna win as many chips when you raise fold. And whereas the big blind is then all of a sudden going to be getting a better price on its call, which is going to be calling the situation like a ton of the time with a really sort of wide range. So it's really sort of like a balancing act. So if anything, I would say raising smaller from early position and then potentially raising bigger on the button would actually be sort of the best strategy. The fact that you have a weaker range doesn't really. It doesn't really matter because and going back to just a poker tracker thought, we're looking at poker tracker right now. Is that why are we getting 3-bet more, or sorry, about the same amount from early position than as we are on the button? Now, granted, some of this has to do with the player pool, but it wouldn't be totally different if you looked at a 5-10 or 2-5 sample. The reason is because even though you have a wider range on the button and you're going to face 3-bets from weaker hands, there's only 2 players left to act. Whereas when you raise from early position, you still have to worry about 5 players. So even though so they're going to 3-bet you with a much tighter range, but there's 5 of them as opposed to 2 of them, so that each player has a chance to have 10s plus, ace king, 8-7 suited, whatever their 3-bet hands might be, ace 5 suited, whatever the 3-bet hands might be, to then 3-bet you. So it's sort of like, well, we could have 5 players 3-betting 6% of hands, or we could have 2 players 3-betting 12. It ends up becoming like a very comparable sort of number. So yeah, sort of for that reason, I would say the smaller, and because of the sort of how aggressive the games, especially online, are, pre-flop, I would say sort of use the smaller pre-flop raise size, whereas live, we didn't really talk about that, but live, because you don't face as many 3-bets as you like the bigger size, but focusing on online, I think, yeah, raising to 2 to 2.5x from the earlier positions, and then maybe playing around with a bigger size on the button could be okay. But in general, I find that many players, especially at mid and lower stakes, play too tight. So playing looser and then raising to a smaller size, I think probably offers you the best strategy from all positions, from early position to the button. And hope you guys enjoyed this video. And if you're not in the lab yet, definitely check it out. All of our paid content is very similar to this. The lab's a full sort of comprehensive course, and you can get sort of answers to your questions in potentially a video format on YouTube like this. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching, and hope to see you in the lab. Thank you very much for watching that video. We really hope you enjoyed it. Doug and I are going to be running a contest this month to win an hour of coaching with each of us. There are going to be 2 winners drawn at the end of the month. Click the link here to be entered to win.